Hello everyone, as you may or may not know, I have been a Doctor Who fan since I was about 8 years old. This passion eventually resulted in me creating this YouTube channel you are watching today. And over that time, I've expressed my relative disappointment with the most recent run of the show, at time of recording, helmed by showrunner Chibnall. And my reasons for said disappointment have varied over time, some of which include the fact that in my opinion, the characters can come across as rather shallow and hollow, with development being lacking, plots being filled with too many elements, leading to what I believe to be rather messy results, expositional dialogue that feels unnatural and like it's talking down to the audience at points, etc. And I would still argue that I believe those things now, but none of them capture what I think is the biggest issue with this run of the show, that being politics. Now before you click off, I'm not referring to the idea that many online have posited that this era is too woke. It's actually the opposite. The reason I think this era has felt off to me is because I don't think this era has been woke enough, so to speak. Allow me to explain. Doctor Who, ever since its inception, has always been a pretty progressive show for the time in which it was broadcast, with it being the first show to have a female producer at the BBC with Verity Lambert, as well as the first to have an Indian director, Waris Hussain, all the way back in the 1960s. That's not to say it's never had some, shall we say, questionable moments in its almost 59-year history, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any property that old that hasn't had at least one or two of those moments at one time or another. But generally, Doctor Who has been a rather forward-thinking show. This extends to the character of the Doctor themselves, who's pretty much always been a free-spirited, humble adventurer with a desire to help and improve the places and lives of the people they encounter, as opposed to their own race, the Time Lords, whose main goal is to observe others and maintain the status quo rather than improve it. It is for this reason that the Doctor left his home planet to begin with, because he was bored and tired of Gallifreyan bureaucracy and decided to explore and assist the universe in its ongoing fight between good and evil. As a result, the Doctor has become an icon who fights injustice wherever they encounter it, and are not afraid to challenge corrupt systems when they encounter them. This aspect, however, one that I would argue is an integral part of the show's DNA, has felt somewhat lacking in its most recent iteration, with the Doctor, and by extension the show's primary goal, now seeming to be to maintain the status quo at any and all costs, something that feels completely counter to the spirit of Doctor Who, and what I believe is the biggest reason this show has felt off to me, but that I haven't been able to fully articulate for the longest time. But in order for you all to better understand where I'm coming from, I suppose I had better provide a few examples in the current run where the show's political message has felt wrong, starting off with what is probably the most infamous example, which people have spoken about to death at this point, and I apologise for that, but it's the best example I can think of. In Series 11, Episode 7, the Doctor and friends find themselves at an outer space delivery service called Kablam, which initially seems like an allegory for real-life companies like Amazon. The company is entirely self-regulating, meaning it can essentially impose any rules upon its workforce without being challenged by any sort of higher authority. As a result, the workers are treated very poorly. They have ankle bracelets that monitor their performance and report back to the higher-ups. Conversations are constantly randomly monitored by robots. One employee only makes enough money to see their daughter twice a year, and humans only actually account for 10% of the workforce of Kablam, with the other 90% being fully automated, and as far as we're told, the only reason it's not 100% is because the workers' unions demanded a higher percent of human workers. So all this paints a picture that Kablam is a pretty awful place to work, that in any other Doctor Who story would be challenged by the Doctor and friends. Anyway, because it's Doctor Who, everything starts going haywire, robots attack, and it's established that the artificial intelligence system that runs Kablam has, quote, gone rogue. The reason for this, it's revealed, is that a worker named Charlie has been planning to send a bunch of explosive packages to the customers of Kablam in order to erode people's trust in automation and allow for more human workers, with him saying, quote, 10%, they want us to be grateful. 10% of people get to work. What about the other 90%? What about our futures? Because without action, next time it will be 7%, then 5, then 1. I am stronger than you. I'm not going to stand by and accept it. People like me, my generation, we change things. We make things happen. And while it is expected that the Doctor wouldn't approve of the violent means that Charlie is attempting to achieve his goal, she should at least be able to empathise with his struggle, right? After all, this is the same character that passionately explained how dangerous capitalism could be if it was allowed to go too far, and even punched a literal racist in the face just series before. And how does the Doctor react? This isn't a cause. You're not an activist. This is cold-blooded murder. And the systems aren't the problem. How people use and exploit the system, that's the problem. People like you. And am I the only one who thinks this feels wrong? Again, the problem is not with the fact that she believes that killing innocent people is wrong. That is in character for the Doctor. What isn't, though, is believing that the systems aren't the problem, especially given how we've demonstrated that the system is very clearly flawed. In addition to the fact that the intelligence kills Kira, another worker who it knew Charlie had feelings for, in I guess what is a form of retaliation to what Charlie is doing. However, whereas the Doctor condemns the idea of people being killed by Charlie's plan, saying, even if it costs people's lives, you kill a load of customers at Kablam, let the systems take the fall for it, erode people's trust in automation, make people angry. But when the machine kills someone, the Doctor says it knew what you were planning. The maintenance man, access everywhere, noticed by hardly anyone, almost in an attempt to justify its actions, which comes across as rather hypocritical, right? Like, no, Charlie, you can't kill people in order to campaign for better worker rights, but the system can kill someone in order to prove a point, no problem. This is because the machine was fighting to preserve the status quo, and in the 13th Doctor's mind, if something is doing that, then the ends justify the means, which, as I said earlier, feels totally counter to what we've known about the Doctor up until this point, and feels much more in line with something the Time Lords would do. Oh, but it gets better. The Doctor then decides to detonate the packages inside the factory, thus killing Charlie the activist in the process. All's well that ends well, eh? And then, when the story's wrapped up, Kablam decides to give their employees 2 weeks paid leave as a result of their co-workers being blown up. How nice of them! And upon hearing that, the Doctor and crew head off, satisfied with another job well done. And if this was just a one-off case of people's actions being vilified while glorifying, or at very least not questioning, the systems and institutions that allow those events to happen, we could all just clock it up to one dodgy episode and then move on with our lives. But unfortunately, that's not what happens. For example, in Orphan 55, a story in which the Doctor and friends find themselves on an outer space resort surrounded by a desolate planet, which, spoilers, turns out to be Earth, the Doctor makes a speech at the end of the episode declaring that, unless people face facts and change, catastrophe is coming. But it's not decided. You know that. The future is not fixed. It depends on billions of decisions and actions, and people stepping up. Humans. I think you forget how powerful you are. Lives change worlds. People can save planets or wreck them. That's the choice. Be the best of humanity. Which not only is an argument that lacks any real amount of nuance, like I'm pretty sure nobody wakes up and goes, you know what, I want to wreck the planet. Well, unless you buy NFTs, I guess. But also, this speech makes no mention of the corporations that pollute the planet far more than any one individual person ever could. Because this era's approach to politics is to present a very basic good-bad moral binary, in which, yes, I agree, we do need to maintain the planet, but it's not just individual people that need to do that, it's also corporations, which comes back to the belief this era seems to have, which I mentioned earlier, that there are good and bad actions individuals can take, but the society in which the person who makes said decisions is born into is above being questioned. Another example of this is Rosa, a story that centres around the gang travelling back to Alabama in the 1950s to stop a space racist that's trying to make it so that the civil rights movement never occurs by having Rosa Parks never get on a bus, which allows her to protest having to give her seat up to a white passenger. And again, in this story, racism is presented as something just bad people do, and isn't something inherent to the society of the 1950s, and a practice that was in fact protected by law at the time. To clarify, it is obviously bad to be racist or bigoted in any way, but the problem with this story is that it only really explores bigotry in the most surface level of ways, as in reality, nobody is born bigoted. Bigotry is often a product of the society you are born into and the people you are raised by, and the people you are raised by just carry the beliefs of the world they were born into. Again though, in Rosa, the systems are never questioned, only the actions of the people who exist within that system. And to clarify, I'm not saying the actions of those people should never be questioned. They absolutely should. But there is never any attempt made to change the culture that allows those people to exist in the first place. A scene which exemplifies this is a scene in which companions Ryan and Yaz are discussing the racism they have to face in their own daily lives, as they are both people of colour. And it's important to note for this exchange that Yaz is a police officer herself. I'm sick of this place already. I know, but to be here, just as history's taking place. This ain't history here, Yaz. We're hiding behind bins. I'm having to work so hard to keep my temper, every second here. I could have slapped that guy back there as soon as we arrived. Thank God my nan taught me how to keep my temper, never give them the excuse. Yeah, my dad tells me the same. Yeah, see? It's not like Rosa Parks wipes out racism in the world forever. Otherwise, how come I get stopped more by the police than my white mates? Oi, not this police. This scene is pretty interesting because it's one of the few times a character highlights a flaw in the systems that they live with, most specifically the police, and the best thing a character can say to counter it is essentially, well, I wouldn't do that. Again, making it seem like bigotry is purely a choice individuals make rather than something that can be caused by corrupt systems. Yaz then goes on to say, but they don't win, those people. I can be a police officer now because people like Rosa Parks fought those battles for me, for us, and in 50 years' time, there'll be a black president as leader. Who knows where they'll be 50 years after that? But that's proper change. Again, those people implies that bigotry is purely a choice an individual makes, and that institutions like the police have no part to play in the perpetuation of these ideas, which we know isn't true, which makes the fact that Yaz wants to work for the police all the more interesting, and could lead to some interesting character conflict in an episode such as this that literally has a racist police officer, but no, it doesn't, because the system is above being questioned. To clarify, I'm not claiming to speak on behalf of people of colour or any other minority which I do not represent. I was merely using this as an example of the system being seen as unchangeable, and people being the only reason for all of the system's ills. And if people only abided by the system, then everything would be fine. After all, the systems aren't the problem. And I think what gets me about this personally is that I am someone who's been directly impacted by society's inability to change. In case you aren't aware, I have quadriplegic cerebral palsy, a condition which predominantly affects my nervous system, meaning that the signals sent from my brain to my limbs get kinda scrambled. Imagine a puppet with some strings that don't work. But as a result of this, I have been bigoted against, and a large reason for that is because the world I was born into refuses to educate others about people such as myself. And I think above anything else, this is the reason this era has felt so alien and off to me. Because it took a character, and by extension a show, that fought against injustice and turned it into a show that only really seeks to maintain the status quo. Which is why its attempts at progressivism feel so hollow to me. Hell, even in Doctor Who Flux, the most recent series to have aired at the time of recording this, the primary conflict comes down to a group of people who want to destroy the status quo just because, and the Doctor who wishes to maintain it, because it exists that way for a reason. Ultimately, this era's biggest failing, in my opinion, is refusing to challenge the world around it and continuing to tell very basic morality tales that the wide majority of people agree with, but that don't really challenge anyone beyond very young children. And that's something that Doctor Who has and should always do. Hey everyone, thank you for listening to this. It's a bit different from my usual content. I hope you enjoyed it. I was just thinking about this the other day and I decided to make it into a little script. It's been a while since I've done a proper scripted content, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to like, comment down below your thoughts on this video more than any other. I'd be genuinely curious to see what you guys thought. Subscribe if you're new, and I will see you later. Shout out to Debs Iona, Shane Smith, Ree Keffin, Seb Lowndes, Jay Monroe, Hash Shandycoot, Patrick Mewson, Simon Ashley, Steve Safaro, and Andrew Townser. If you want to become a member, feel free to do so. It really helps out. You get exclusive posts, shout outs in every video, and even your own badge and custom emojis to use.